I must say I was amazed or puzzled by the very title of your paper, the EU, the possibility of a EU mediation, peacekeeping, because frankly, I've been watching what's going on in Ukraine for the past years, and I never even thought of considering this possibility. Fortunately, when I read further the paper, I found out that indeed we agree that the EU cannot be a mediator in a conflict for which it has such an important stake. It plays a direct role in the conflict in Ukraine. So I move on to say maybe what about a peacekeeping mission and the possibility that the EU could come there? Well, to have a peacekeeping mission, you must first have a peace treaty, which we don't have a functioning ceasefire on the ground. But legally, when you look at it from a perspective of international law, the first condition which you would allow foreign troops getting in the country is to have that country's inviting or welcoming or agreeing for this. And the fact is that before the defeat in the Baltimoore in February 2015, you never had any openness from the Poroshenko government as to welcome such a peace. So the answer is until 2015 was, well, there is no possibility for EU peace mission because there is no desire from the Ukrainian government to accept that the country is now divided in two parts. And of course, when you bring peacekeepers in, what you do is that you settle, you give this division a longer life, if I can put it that way. Having said this, now, what would be the condition of having a EU peace involvement in Ukraine? Well, there are some balance of power consideration that are there, and EU would not move into a territory where Russia is there and act as stopping the Russian from moving further in Ukraine for very basic geopolitical reason. I was also skeptical. But you came to this conclusion yourself. You mentioned in the paper, so there's no disagreement. My question is, why did you choose to consider the record of the EU policy in terms of peacekeeping or mediating? You've been through looking at the agenda for peace of Boutros-Ghali, the Lisbon Treaty, and so on, as if the past record of the Ukrainian of the EU policy in terms of peacemaking would have any impact on the possibility to do something in Ukraine. And that methodologically puzzled me, because for me, even if the EU had the best record, the best policy, the best experience, there is no chance in the current circumstances that it could have do something, even as you mentioned, this possibility that right after the Crimea annexion, you say there should have been an early preventive mission, but the Ukrainian government didn't want such a mission. So that very possibility was not there from the start. So my question: why is this big inquiry into past EU record in terms of mediation, peacekeeping, peace building, whatever? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. There are several things for this. First of all, you're completely right that even in January 2015, the president of Ukraine, it was, or early February even, it was a Munich conference where Poroshenko said, no peacekeepers, we don't need it. So he really puzzled our international partners why suddenly in 2 weeks, the National Security Council, and the president is the head of the National Security Council, why they issued these invitations. It's puzzled a lot. However, it was seen more as a political gest rather than the really security and strategic decision. And definitely why I went that far, and you mentioned Boutros-Ghali with his idea of the delegation of the functions to the regional organizations to be involved. Because the European Union, as it acts, it is a normative power, and it is a power that always based on some documents. If it is not in the documents, European Union are usually not doing it. So to analyzing the possibilities for the European Union actions, you always need to look, was it at any kind of the resolution or strategy or wherever, did they consider it and discuss it? Because for them, for themselves, it is very important. And definitely we can see all the limitations and restrictions for the European Union involvement. But these questions are actively discussed. that European Union should take the main role for the Ukrainian resolution, because for Russian Federation, European Union is seen as more agreeable rather than the United States. I mean, it is in the discourse. I'm not saying it is mine, but it is very actively discussed in Europe and in Russia as well, because they are more open for the European Union being present there rather than for the United States, and they don't see anybody else. Definitely China will not be the mediator over there, or they don't imagine Switzerland to come. They don't see this conflict in such terms. That's why, for me, methodologically, it was very interesting to understand, okay, how European Union saw itself, what mechanism, what tools it can see on its, not even agenda, let's say on the plate, what knives and forks you have, how you're going to come to this. Because without this, European Union even not make the first step for the political discussions of being involved over there.
Thank you.
Do you have another question, John? No?
I would like you to develop maybe further on the idea that if there would have been an earlier EU mission right after the Crimea annexion, you developed that you brought up that idea at the very end of your paper, and I was like, oh.
As you saw it, it was a quote. It was not my idea. It was discussed by the European experts, and they proposed this, how they analyzed, and it can be used. In my case, what will be the conditions for the greater EU involvement? It seems to me that for the peacekeeping, I don't see any conditions. I can tell it openly because I don't see the European Union as an adequate peacekeeper. And here it's not only ceasefire to be signed. We have legally ceasefire. And we can discuss should it be peacekeeping or peacemaking mission. I don't see any experience for the European Union to be present there, even with the invitation of Ukraine. So for peacekeeping, I'm cutting all the ends here. With the mediation, because we already have this Normandy format, I can imagine its transformation on a certain level. One of the conditions for this will be elections in Germany and France next year. So in case the leadership of this country change, we can see that European Union would like to have greater Brussels involvement in case Merkel loses and in case Hollande, or let's say, better not even Hollande loses because it's almost reality, but in case Sarkozy wins.
No.
So, so to have quite an anti-Ukrainian personality. So why? Because, for example, now in Nagorno-Karabakh, where we have this Minsk group, where the France, United States, and Russia as the three chairs of the Minsk groups, for several years they are discussing the possibility that maybe France should be changed by the European Union, to have the European Union as an actor but not France within this triangle. So I can imagine the same change in the Minsk or in Normandy format as well, because more and more we are discussing now the possibility maybe of the Normandy format change for the peace resolution, because there are other European Union countries which would like to be involved, like Poland, for example.
And you think Russia would agree with having Poland sitting on the table?
Poland, no, but it can be not only Poland, but why I named it that it is also the desire of the European Union to have not just a German voice, but to have European voice there.
That's why France is there, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
I agree with the chaperon. I will
Yeah,
might quote you on this. But you said the condition is that there will be new election in France and Germany, and I said, no, the condition would be that there would be election in the Donbass itself, that there would be representative that could be sitting on the table and negotiate. And until the Ukrainian government changed the constitution and allowed this electoral process to take place in the Donbass, then you will end up having nobody to talk with. So I wonder, how could we think about a peacekeeping mission if we don't have people sitting on the other side of the table that we treat as legitimate interlocutor in this process?
Let's say, first of all, for the peace processes, it's not always important, because if you go to the Georgian conflict resolution, for example, for many years, Abkhazia and South Ossetia was not allowed to sit on the table, and it took many years for the Russian Federation, after 2008 in Geneva format, to move it and to insist that they should sit, but not Russia represents them. Because everybody understood perfectly after 2008 that it is not South Ossetia Slovakia decision, but the Russian decisions made over there. The same here. It's not, I would separate it, the question about elections and the question of them sitting on the table. Sitting on the table, it is recognizing that who are making decisions are leadership of DPR and LPR, when everybody knows the decision is made in Moscow, but not in Donetsk and Lugansk. So that is one. Elections is completely different. Ukraine is agreeing on election, but with two conditions, just two. First is security, because when you have fighting and killing daily, how you can organize elections? And it's completely legitimate requirement. The second requirement, because in the Minsk agreement, it is written that elections according to the Ukrainian legislation. Everybody agreed to this. Russia agreed, DPR, LPR agreed to this Minsk agreement. What does mean according to the Ukrainian legislation? Central Election Committee of Ukraine being the organizer of the elections. DPR completely disagree with this. Second, adherence to the OSCE principles, meaning international observers, international and national media presence, allowance of all citizens to vote or to be elected, and you have one and a half.
All condition for a regime change in the republic. We got the idea.
So that is nothing. It is not something that we're inventing new conditions how to organize these elections. We are just saying that you signed this agreement, as well as we are ready to organize, but provide the basic conditions for these elections. As soon as they say 1.5 million IDPs will not have rights for voting, you already don't have elections.
Considering the situation on the ground, do you consider that having peacekeeping coming from NATO country would help to ease up the situation on the ground? Or should we might think about having other people coming in? There's this Belarusian President Lukashenko that offered, sending its own troop. I think in this conflict, Belarus has been one of the few countries that hasn't taken any side either on the US, Europe, or Russia, blaming both for the mess we're in right now. Could Belarusian forces be a credible soldier on the ground, capable to talk with both sides?
In one of the papers before, I just made the mathematical calculations how many European Union countries, peacekeepers, were present within the United Nations peace operations for the last 10 years. And that's interesting that the numbers are extremely low. Extremely low. So to imagine that suddenly the European Union member states will provide a lot of peacekeepers to the territory of Ukraine, I just can't imagine at all. The issue is that currently we are not even discussing the possibility for this. We are discussing about the change of the mandate of the OSCE mission in Ukraine, and that is what was agreed in Berlin. Let's see how it will work, because it is elaborated, but the basic political agreement was made in Berlin a month ago. That OSCE will receive the military component for the security reasons, because the functions that they need now, most of this, for this kind of peace operation, most of the functions are done by the OSCE. The question is that because they are unarmed, they don't have access to many territories, they're afraid for their security, so we need to improve to enhance this mission. We can need the United Nations mission, like in some of the African countries we had, when the elections happening, to secure the elections and to help organizing elections. But that is different type of the missions that can be there. Which countries can provide forces, that's very interesting. Belarus can be one of them, even that Belarus is not so active in the peace operations, let's be honest. Canada can be
they were
one.
pretty much involved in the mediation going on, you know.
But they are facilitators. They have specific functions over there, and they're perfect in this. But Canada can be one of the countries.
No, Canada is a NATO member. No.
The question
you
is,
can't have NATO members in the conflict that was first driven by NATO's enlargement
that is
ambition.
Interesting, because it is interesting which countries perceived as in which way. And that is very interesting when you read the Russian sources. There are several countries that are clearly identified as NATO. USA is evil. United Kingdom now is quite evil for them. Germany,
Canada is just
Lithuania,
a puppet
Poland.
state anyway.
No, Canada. Many people even don't know that Canada is NATO member. Canada is seen as somebody as Canada. So Canada is seen as peaceful, as not. People even forgetting how strong is Ukrainian community here and can be influential. Because when you speak with many Russian experts and say about Canada, oh yeah, why not? And you said, okay, you don't care about this. Oh, really? But that is more about the perceptions rather than about the reality. I can easily imagine Norway. I can easily imagine Sweden. I can easily imagine small states from the Balkans.
And why not Switzerland?
Switzerland, because Switzerland doesn't have peacekeepers. You know, it was one of the reasons why they were not members of the United Nations till 2002. But Switzerland is more the territory for. But we have Minsk, which played perfectly, and I would say even better than Switzerland, the functions of the location for the mediation.
Should we open it up to larger questions, please? Yes, in the back.
Okay. From the day one of this conflict, the Ukrainian government defined it not as a war, not as a civil war, but as an anti-terrorist operation. Now, fight against terrorism is always internal problem. And I don't know the stories when mediators or peacekeepers were brought into solving conflict with terrorists. So my question is, as long as Ukrainian government define it as a terrorism, anti-terrorist operation, is there any, ground to even think about bringing someone to mediate this problem, this fighting? And by the way, actually, Canada these days not considered in Russia as a peaceful country, as a Sweden, because Sweden and Poland were the most active countries in pulling Ukraine into associated agreement.
Completely agree with your question, and that is a question that will raise a lot inside of the Ukrainian society, how we name it. The anti-terroristic organization was named on the first months especially, and it was done because of several reasons. One of them more about whom to be involved, which forces. It was mostly driven by the internal Ukrainian legislation, which forces you can use for the operation, and about the necessity that if it is not the war, was connected with the how to translate it, the law of the military state. I mean, when you say it is war, it should be a war state in the country. So a lot of other legislation should be involved that Ukrainian state didn't want to involve, so not to limit the human rights inside of the country. So it was more about the internal legal political discourse rather than reality of the situation. In the latest documents of the Ukrainian government, you can find different statements about it. It is still called ATO, yeah, but more and more, especially in the parliamentary documents, you can find even the phrases about the Russian-Ukrainian war, naming it like this, or several other options. So that is a big discourse still inside of the country. But anyway, that's why I, for example, use it just the Ukrainian crisis or Ukrainian conflict as the most neutral term for this. I completely disagree that it is civil war, and we can go into big discussions why. But as soon as it is conflict, doesn't matter how many sides, the third party, the mediator, can be involved. And mediators are very often involved when it is the not intrastate conflicts, but when it is the internal states conflicts. And there are more examples in the history for this. For intrastate, it is more if you go to the Inter-American Treaty on the mediation back to the 1930s, where it was clear definitions how mediators work between the states. But currently, it's very seldom.
Boris, yeah.
I'm going to take violent exception to a lot of what's been said here. First of all, I served in the Canadian Army. I dealt with Ukrainians as part of that. And we were told, and the soldiers are now being told, Canadian soldiers who deal with Ukrainians, make sure they know they will never be members of NATO. That's been standing NATO policy. That's what we were told. And we were told that rather violently. That message was to come across. So let's take that discussion off the table. unless there is other evidence. Secondly, this whole discussion of peacekeeping, two concepts in peacekeeping, the UN Charter. Peace observer, peace enforcement. Peace observer is the guy sitting there with the UN flag, watching both sides shoot at him and reporting on it. In essence, that's what we have now with the OSCE. Peace enforcement is going in there and being bigger than everybody who's there and making sure they keep the peace. So let's take a look at the first one, peace observer, an expanded OSCE mission, arming them. How are you going to arm them? Are you going to give them pistols? Are you going to give them rifles? Are you going to give them machine guns? All that's immaterial because both sides can blow them out of the water. The only reason for arming them would be to enforce peace. So you're talking about a peace enforcement mission. What does that mean? That means having more and better armament and coordination than the two satrapies, Luhansk and Donetsk, have right now. That means having the ability to deal with 600 tanks, 1,200 artillery pieces, 1,200 armored personnel carriers. There is only one organization in the world right now that could effectively enforce a peace there. That's NATO. The Russians are in the Security Council. They'll never allow it there. They wouldn't allow it politically. So a lot of this discussion is just sort of completely unrealistic. And a lot of it, in terms of things like arming the peacekeepers there partially, peace observers there partially, can lead us to the same sort of situation, and I'm talking as a Canadian or possibly a NATO member, that we had in Srebrenica, where the Dutch weren't properly prepared to deal with a much heavier force, where they were essentially stripped, chased out in their underwear, and their uniforms and weapons were used to commit genocide. And I think we have to be very careful when we start loosely talking about arming, not arming, and so forth. We have to realize what we're doing.
Yeah, I agree with you, but you are a little bit simplifying because you're forgetting about a lot of other functions according to the United Nations mandates that peacekeepers and peacemakers were doing. For example, demining of the territory. And currently we have a huge problem at the war zone over there about the mines and or unexploded missiles still being there, that every week you have cases of the casualties because of these. And it was recently one of the agreements, for example, that the NATO is providing a special trust for demining these territories. So that is one of the classical United Nations mandates to assist with the demining. Ukrainian peacekeepers were doing it in Lebanon, and it was one of the most successful missions over there in the south of Lebanon. Convoying, for example, and many others. So it's not only observing or imposing peace, it is also a lot of the additional. And that is why yesterday I was discussing like how we can discuss which countries can be involved if we don't start with the discussions what functions we need, what kind of mandate we need for the peace operation over there. In terms of OSCE, that is interesting because it is not a theoretical, it is a political discussion now in Minsk about it. And there were several variants for this. One of the variants were that it should be separate OSCE mission, so not like we have now SMM, a special monitoring mission, and it should be separate mission for this. The agreement that currently reached, we can't say that it is a final agreement, but currently reached, that it will be just addition to the mandate of the current mission of the SMM. They are mostly discussing not about the big guns, they are discussing about pistols, maximum rifles, and some armored vehicles. Why? How it is explained? The explanation is that these people need to feel protection. So it is first of all for their more personal assurance in their own security. The second is that it is said less officially that because they interact with the military man from another side, who very often threaten them, and in case these people would be with a visible, let's say, elements that they are also armed, they will get higher level of respect from another side, not being prevented for reaching some territories or observing something. So it is tricky I agree with you, but that is the argument that are on the table and the arguments which are more or less accepted by those who are making decision. So we can speak about theory observing co-enforcement, but reality in Berlin, the agreement reached that OEC will receive the armoring component.
Gr-
Some slightly more protection, some slightly more equipment and armament, you make them somewhat more confident, but you don't match them. The respect comes, you don't get more respect as you arrive in an armored personnel carrier. You get, or wear a military uniform. You get more respect when you have more guns, more airplanes in the air than the other guy. And anything else is actually asking for more trouble, because the guys on the other side will say, hey, so you got this little thing. I've got 3 guys with RPGs in the bush.
Okay,
This is a joke.
We're running out of time. Okay, I need to give the floor to someone else. Okay, Elena, please. Up in front. Yeah, microphone. Thank you.
Could you develop, please, a bit more about what you said about what should be the functions of the peacekeeping mission? Because as for today, the main problem is political and not military, because there are still fights, but it's not like heavy war when you need like real peacekeepers to keep the peace on the ground. So what would they have to do?
If we take from the, let's say, set of the traditional functions, if we could check, we need these, I would naming first definitely demining. So that is a huge assistance that necessary is there, and that can be done. The second, in case elections would be organized, like the agreement made, so they can be involved in the securing of the election places and the election process. That is also quite a traditional function for this. The third one, it is the border control and border patrolling. Again, the very classical mission for the peacekeepers. The Russian-Ukrainian border, which is not controlled now, what Russia does not want Ukraine to control, so the third party can be. And that is one of what is on the discussion table now in Minsk, that OEC need to be the border control officers in somewhere, let's say. No, OEC have only at 2 checkpoints, Gudkova and I forgot the second name all the time. So there are only 2 points where they have very specific missions. They are not border control there. They are standing on their very small place. They can't check the cars. They can't speak with people. They are only counting how many cars and observing from the side. So their mission is extremely limited, and that's what is discussing in Vienna every time, that they should get access to more points and also for real patrolling, but not of staying just in one place. So at least these 3 is already important. Then it can be demilitarization. So those weapons that are now taken, it can be put under the control not of the 2 sides, but under the control of the peacekeeper. Control, let's say, under the protection, it's proper word. These functions can be added as well. Luckily, convoying is not what we need over there, but providing humanitarian assistance, meaning that when humanitarian tracks are coming, so assisting with securing them, these also can be one of the missions for these peacekeepers.
Great. I'm sorry we have to end the session right now. Let's have a big round of applause for Hanna Shelest.